HTML5 introduces a completely different way of marking up your text. With HTML5, we get completely into the idea of semantic markup. The idea of the HTML markup has nothing to do with how it looks. It's simply sectioning off our document and creating an outline for that document. So there's a number of new HTML5 tags that you may find useful. The first one is header. And in the document's header, you will find things like the title of the website or a welcome message or a graphic or something like that. So let's put in our header, welcome to our HTML5 layout site. H2 from the HTML and CSS with HTML5 course. Now you have to remember when working with HTML5 that not all the browsers currently are prepared to deal with all of the HTML5 code. So you may get some unpredictable things with certain HTML5 with different browsers. So there's our header. Now this I think will look fairly consistent across different browsers. I don't think we'll have much variation with this pretty simple code. Alright, so there's our header. Now, of course, we could use the header in our CSS code later to create a specific format or design for the header. Now, if you have a header, you probably also have a footer. So let's put a footer before the closing body tag. So the footer usually has information like legalese and that type of thing. So let's say copyrights 2011, Mark Lassoff, learn2program.tv. All right, perfect. So now we've got our header and our footer. Check it out in Firefox. And there's our footer right where we'd expect it. So the way the names of these tags developed is that they took a look at the way people were IDing their divs. A little later you'll see that divs, logical divisions that we looked at in the last video, can have IDs. And things like ID equals header, ID equals footer came up most commonly. So they simply took those names and made those into the HTML5 tags. Now we're not done yet. Let's do an aside. Now an aside sounds like it should go on the side, and probably you would code your CSS that way. But for right now, it's not going to end up on the side. So let's just put in here H3, news from the home front, whatever that means. And then a paragraph. This news is going in an aside. It is secondary to the main content on the page. So let's close our P tag. So within our aside, we've got an H3 and a P. Now, we can actually use these elements multiple times within the page. So notice here, the aside appears like this. Oops, I didn't close my H3 tag correctly. Let's try it again. There we go. So our aside just appears kind of in line with everything else. And that would likely be the same case in any of the browsers that we looked at, because it's with the CSS that will actually put that in a position. But here, this is just for us to know, okay, this is an aside. Now, again, we could use these more than once. We could have two asides on the page if we wanted to. More news from the home front. And I'll just put in here, this is a second aside. Let's make some more room here. This is a second aside. Save. And they just keep going down the page like that. All right, so we've looked at aside, we've looked at header, we've looked at footer. Let's take a look at nav. Now, nav is generally where you'd put the navigation for your site. Now, you'll put these roughly in the order they appear on the page, but that's not always able to be done because things may be next to each other. But so you can really kind of put this anywhere. So our nav is going to be where it'd be our nav bar. So let's say in here we had different links, and we'll talk about how to do these later. Link to company news, a link to About Us, we'll do 2 more, a link to our products, and of course the ubiquitous Contact Us link. All right, so they appear right below the second aside. So like I said, they're appearing right in order. There's nothing really particularly amazing about what we're doing here, except we're using HTML5 markup to mark up the page, making our life just a little bit easier when we use the CSS later on in the course. All right, so we've done nav. Now, we also can have within our content articles. So let's see here after the nav, before the footer, we have an article. So the first article is called, let's do this in an H3, How to Cook for One, something I do a lot, sadly. Cooking for one is a challenge. It can be both expensive and time-consuming if not done correctly. All right. I'm going to turn on the word wrap here just to make things a little bit easier to see. There we go. All right. So there is our article. There it appears, How to Cook for One. And of course, we can have multiple articles on the page. Now, our articles can have sections. So we could have a section here. And then we could have a second section of the same article. And these sections could be chapters. We're always going to use the tag section. Let's say we had a second section of our article called Recipes for One. Kind of sad, isn't it? I actually like living alone. All right. So there's Recipes for One. And we have our different sections of our article. So we've talked about article, aside, header, footer, nav, and section. The last HTML5 text markup tag I want to talk about is named after me. It's called mark. And it's used kind of like spam. So let's say we wanted to mark this, maybe highlight it or whatever. Now, how it appears is going to be up to us with the CSS a little bit later. So right now, it's just marked, but you can see it has no effect in the way it appears on the page. It just has these strange mark tags around it. But again, that has absolutely no outward appearance, except in Chrome, where something that's marked gets this yellow highlight. And again, that's the default style sheet. We can change it. But notice how it differs between the different browsers. So here we are on the left in Firefox, and it doesn't do anything with the mark, where Chrome now processes the mark and makes it a background highlight. So again, this is just a good example of how HTML5 is not fully implemented in the browsers. So you've got to be a little bit careful about how you use it. But again, as new versions of the browsers come out, you're going to see more and more of this HTML5 code implemented consistently.